Hello, Kirsty. Welcome to the podcast today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Julia. Apart from having just 1 hour's sleep because my son's 18th birthday today, and he was making spaghetti and meatballs at 3 a.m. So,
As you
yes,
do.
sleep deprived, but I'm very happy to be here. So, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, look, Kirsty, I loved the information that you sent me. So, for those who don't know you, Kirsty, you are co-founder of Be Radical and co-CEO of Radical Recruit. And I think what really struck me was the your background that you sent me. So you talked about growing up in a small village as the blind girl. And you were one of the first blind children to go to mainstream school. And you said that nobody could really help you when you were exploring your career. And sort of fast forward, you're now co-founder and co-CEO, but there's so much rich information here. You know, you were compelled to set up a service designed to enable disabled people to start well and thrive in their jobs. And I think what struck me when I read that is surely everyone wants to do that, but perhaps that's not the case, or perhaps they're not aware of it. But you went and so you run this now, and it's called Accelerating Accessibility. So I think we're going to have a great conversation today here, Kirsty, and I'd love to know a little bit more about all of that. So welcome. So tell me a little bit more about then your drive to where you are today, because that why is really powerful for you.
Absolutely, yes. So, as you said, I grew up in a teeny tiny village. I was known as the blind girl, and I just wanted to be known by my name. You know, you just often people define you by your disability. Oh, it's the blind one, I just wanted to be known by my name, and my parents were advised to send me to a specialist school, and I'm stubborn as hell, and I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay with my friends. So I went to a secondary school who had no experience really of educating children with visual impairment. And it was a real struggle and a battle, but we got through. I had the same battles at college as well, but got through that and decided I didn't want to go to university because I didn't want to battle anymore. And moved to London, where I became Kirsty because, I think London's far more multicultural, and there's a degree of anonymity that you can have in London. So I was no longer known as the blind girl. I was known as Kirsty, and it was quite nice. Probably a few other names as well. So I then spent around 20 years working specifically with disabled people, primarily blind and visually impaired people. And there were so many talented people that I met along my journey who just couldn't catch a break. And I worked in the employment field, and I think the statistics are for blind and visually impaired people, only around 27% of blind and partially sighted people of working age are actually in employment. And over those years, those statistics really haven't changed. And so when we set up Be Radical last year in March, I thought this is my opportunity to try and do something to break this cycle of disabled people who want to work, but just don't get the support that they need to be able to thrive in the workplace. And the government have what they call an access to work scheme, and it's brilliant on paper. Because it's a free service where disabled people can receive a workplace needs assessment, and access to work will fund the equipment and support that person needs. But there's this huge waiting list. And you're asking not only a disabled person to wait 6 months to get the equipment and support they need to do their job, but you're also asking an employer to do that as well. And with the best will in the world, it's a huge barrier to overcome. So I thought, great. And we had a consultation with our employers, and we had consultation with disabled radicals, and managed to come up with 3 kind of key barriers that most disabled people face, which is number 1 is access to opportunity. And lots of disabled people told us that they'd had really traumatizing experiences at the hands of employers, and actually wouldn't even apply to a job if they weren't made to feel welcome from the start. So the first service evolved from that, and we offer consultancy to be able to review an end-to-end recruitment process to help employers attract the communities that they want to attract. The second was the workplace needs assessment, which we can offer now and turn around within 10 days. And then the third service Jim, he's wonderful, 20 years experience working with access to work and in the private sector delivering these workplace needs assessments, had identified a clear problem, which is once disabled people get their equipment and support, around 1 in 8 wait a whole year for it to be implemented, because employers really struggle with that part. So that then became the third service, and one of our radicals called the service Accelerating Accessibility, and I've never forgiven her since, because try saying that when you've had a gin and tonic, it's really difficult. So yes, that was my passion and drive. I just so passionate that you've got disabled people out there who are extraordinarily talented, who could add so much value to an organization, and yet I feel that, when businesses say they want to have a diverse workforce, they want to increase diversity, across the business. Disability is usually, when I say that to an employer and say, well, have you considered more disabled people? Their response is, we're not there yet. We're not quite there yet. And it's like, how is it going to take us? We've all got to do something about it, because, you've got disabled people who want to work, and the opportunities just aren't there.
There's a lot to unpack there, Kirsty. So let's start with your earlier point, because you talked about disabled people not applying or getting frustrated with the application process, or whatever that is. What is what's the obvious barrier that you see right now?
I feel, it's really, really difficult, because there's such a broad spectrum of disability, and everybody's needs are individual. You can have 2 people with exactly the same disability, exactly the same condition, but very different needs. And I think one of the main problems I think is access to information, knowing those jobs are out there. The second is the application process. Businesses make that really, really complicated a lot of the time. They use a lot of jargon in their job descriptions, which mean, people look at it and go, I can't do that job. I don't even know what that means, when actually, it's probably just jargon that the business has used because they think everybody understands the jargon that they use. It's also about the interview process as well. It's about having the hiring community having the confidence to have a conversation about disability and understanding disability. There's all sorts to it. There's just so much that businesses need and can do better, I think.
Yeah, that blows my mind a bit, having spent a lot of my career hiring brilliant people. And focusing on that jargon and stripping it out, making it simple. But what you're saying is it starts from knowing where the jobs are. Perhaps location is also a challenge, how that working relationship is going to be. And then you've got once they enter that hiring process, it's then how the organizational and those hiring managers and recruiters then work with and approach disability.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, I think, Julia, is, when you apply for a job, you've got to have some degree of experience, right? So when a lot of the time, I know when I was at school, work experience, my school didn't know where to put me for work experience. And it's a real struggle for disabled people to get that work experience, to be able to talk about it in an interview. So I think that's another barrier as well.
Yeah. So as you said, lots of challenges in education, but actually enabling disabled people to have the right kind of work experience so they can experience what it's actually like, whether they like it or not, because that's why we do it, right? Work experience. Yeah. So how can that happen? How does that identification process go through? How do we give people some of the right opportunities that they can make those informed decisions?
I think it starts with education for the hiring community, because I think there's a huge fear out there around disability, and I think the fear is fear of offending somebody, and instead of calling a spade and saying to a person, look, I don't understand how you would approach that task, and if somebody asked that to me, I could say, well, actually, I've got assistive software on my laptop that enables my laptop to speak to me, and that enables me then to do the task that I need to do. People just skirt around it because they're so frightened of offending somebody. And then that disabled person walks out of the interview door and the hiring manager goes, oh, actually, I don't think I can employ that person because I don't actually understand how they can do the job. So I think it really does start with education, and dispelling the fears and dispelling the myths around disability.
Yeah, and I can see that, almost that afraidness of having those conversations. So what you're saying is almost like come from a place of curiosity and go, how would that work? And talk about it rather than making a self-judgment about that person. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Samsung did a report, and I think the report revealed that I think almost half of the population felt uncomfortable talking about disability in the workplace. And I mean, if we don't talk about it, how's anything ever going to improve? It's just not. Yeah. So yeah, I think it really does start with education. And I also think, businesses shouldn't be frightened of asking for help. There's organisations such as Accelerating Accessibility, Be Radical out there who are here to help you. It's not, nobody's going to come into your business and say, oh, you're terrible, you're getting it all wrong, and, beat people across the head. That's not the way that we work. It's really going in and having a partnership with an organisation and saying, you're doing this really well, but actually you can improve here, and you know, what are you doing about this? And we know it's a process, but I heard somebody recently say it's not about perfection, it's about progression. And it's so true. I think, you know, lots of businesses are frightened of getting it wrong. And then when you're so frightened of getting it wrong, you never start. So I think most people would forgive an honest mistake if the intention was good.
Yes.
And I think, you know, you learn as you go along, and you will fall down and you will make a few mistakes. Everybody does. But as long as you learn from them and you get better and you progress through, and you've got help out there, then why not? Why not get going? Because you've got this extraordinarily, you know, talented group of people who could, you know, bring so much to your organisation, but you're just discounting them because you're frightened of having a conversation, an open and honest conversation, I think.
Yes, that's really interesting. And that Sanctum report, you know, that nearly half the population feel uncomfortable. It's almost like that fear of, I'm going to be American now, but that fear of litigation, that fear of, you know, that uncomfortableness about approaching it. But if, like you said, it's not about progression, not about perfection. It's about progression. I love that.
Yeah. And I stole that from somebody else, so I can't even take the credit for that. So, but yeah, I you know, I think people are frightened, and of just getting it wrong. And if people don't start, I think that is wrong in itself. It's just, you know, if you don't start and you don't try, that's what's wrong. You've got to try.
So another statistic you shared with me, 1 in 8 disabled people wait over a year, which I know you've talked about the reasonable adjustments. So what does that come down to? So if they're waiting over a year for those adjustments?
It's for all sorts of reasons. So number one is there's probably no policy around reasonable adjustments. So people are kind of trying to find their way in the dark, really. I think people don't want to take responsibility often. So, you know, if you've got a huge organization and you need a piece of software uploaded to your computer that nobody knows about or nobody's heard about before, you know, and you've got these huge IT systems, everyone then becomes very nervous. And I think often reasonable adjustments are passed like a hot potato between line manager, IT department, and HR. And it and it goes round in circles because nobody wants to take responsibility and everybody blames each other. I think it can come down to something as simple as not having a budget for reasonable adjustments as well.
Yeah.
You know, where does this come from? Whose budget does it come out of? There's all sorts of reasons: red tape, policy, money, why everything can take such an incredibly long time. And in that time, you've got a person who is probably losing their confidence because they don't have the equipment and support that they need, is not functioning to their best ability in that job. And that's going to impact on the disabled person themselves. It's also going to impact on the business because that person's not being as productive as they can. And it just leads to all sorts of problems. I think, you know, judging from our experience, what tends to happen, and again, it's all good intention, you know, if somebody gets the equipment and support that they need, it lands on the table, and the business goes great, and we offer support at that point, and usually businesses say, oh no, we've got this, it's fine. And then, you know, a couple of months down the line, we find out that actually they haven't got it and that person's still struggling. And that's why we created the implementation service, a third service for accelerating accessibility, because it is a real issue.
Yeah, so you now help, well, close that gap, I guess, close that time gap so people can get their equipment or whatever they need more quickly to be more productive.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said before, access to work is fantastic, but it doesn't offer support to the employer, really. I think what happens is they produce a report about the equipment and support that person needs. The employer then goes and purchases that support, and it's done. There's no follow-up, really.
Yeah.
And that's, we were really keen when we started accelerating accessibility to make sure that it was a service that not only supported the disabled person, but supported the employer as well. And I think where our reports differ as well, access to work reports are very much about, you need a desk, you need a lamp, you need this. Whereas our reports are much more holistic. So we look at the essentials that a person needs, but we also look at the nice to haves, the additional support that, if you're an employer and you want the best for your hire, then, here's some additional recommendations we can make.
Such as what, Kirsty? Because you talked about the essentials, equipment. But what else?
Yeah, so it might be, for example, most people, and I talk about visual impairment because obviously it's personal to me, but most people aren't born with a visual impairment. You require a visual impairment. And, when you are diagnosed with a disability, there's, all sorts of emotions, and it can be a real loss. It can be, a real grieving process. So if somebody's going through that, we may recommend a nice to have might be that person has grief counselling or some sort of counselling that to help them to come to terms with what's happened in their lives, this huge change in their lives. It might also be that person may require, benefit from having a mentor, or the things that really do add value and make a difference, but wouldn't necessarily be recommended under, equipment and support.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's really good. So then we're talking about reasonable adjustments, getting disabled people into work and then staying there. But how does that happen when, I'm thinking of now the future, and you talked about the employment rate for disabled people is 54%, and the non-employment and non-disabled people is 82%. But you've also mentioned that that's rising. So if everything we talked about is really great and it's good stuff that you're doing, what does that mean for disabled people in the future?
I think, look, we've got an aging population, and naturally, as we get older, I'm certainly getting there now. The things start to go wrong, and so I think it's around 24% of the population have some sort of disability, and we've got to do something to improve these employment statistics, or we're going to have potentially a quarter of our population sitting on benefits. So, employers have got to start thinking about how they can enable disabled people to access the opportunities that they have and to thrive in their workplaces. Because otherwise, it's just going to be a talent and skill shortage, I think, out there.
There is already a talent and skills shortage. And I'm just thinking as you're talking, because this surely fits in with organisations wanting to be much more inclusive and have open workplaces, and organisations who are still looking at DEI policies. Surely that's disabled people fits in that pocket, and actually tapping into those people that can and want to work.
It does, but as I said before, when businesses look at diversity, often I find disabilities at the bottom of the list, because people perceive that it's going to be huge amounts of work or huge challenges, or they don't know how to approach it, and I think that's where BRADs and accelerating accessibility can come into play. It's we're here to help, we're here to advise, and it's not a crime to say, I don't know what I'm doing here, I need some help. But I think businesses find it really hard to say, I need help with this, because they don't want to admit they don't know what they're doing. So you've got all these disability confident employers, but you don't necessarily have to employ a disabled person if you've got that accreditation or that standard, you've achieved that standard. And I will say, look, the government have recently said they're going to start looking at disabled people who are claiming PIP, personal independence payments, and do more to try and get those disabled people back into work. The emphasis is always on the disabled person, Julia, and it just really frustrates me, because we've got so many disabled candidates on our books at Radical Recruit and Be Radical who want to work. So I think there has to be more pressure from government, not on the disabled person, but more on employers to do more. And to, more help, more support for employers, and, getting employers to think outside the box sometimes. So, is it a job, when you're recruiting for a job, is it a job that could be shared between two people who may well struggle with, part of the job, but could do the other part really well, I think if employers don't start thinking outside the box and really doing something about this, we're going to end up in a real old pickle.
If we're not already, right?
If we're not already, we are really, aren't we?
If it's 24% of the population are disabled, is that registered disabled?
I think it's. God, I'm gonna look like I don't. Sorry, Julia.
That's all right.
That question stumped me. Sorry.
That's all right. We can cut that.
I don't believe it's registered disabled. I took the statistic from the government statistics. So they've said it's 20%, 4% of people report having a disability. Okay.
So 24% of the total population are reported to have a disability in the UK. So that's a quarter of the population. So if we're now looking at organisations to say, look, you, Be Radical, can help, or other organisations can help you get disabled people into work, what's the first step that people can take?
I think look at your policy, your recruitment policy, and your recruitment process. I think is the first step, and to make sure that you're removing barriers at that at that central key point of the business, and then look at where you can improve in terms of that recruitment process. So where are you posting your job adverts, for example? Are your job adverts clear and simple and use simple language? Look at your JDs. Are you asking for a degree for a person, doing an administrative role who won't need a degree in that job? Are there accommodations that you can make within that job description? I think, as well as, people are really frightened to disclose a disability often. If people have got an invisible disability, and they think they can get away without disclosing, often they do, because they feel that that's the only way they're going to get a job, because they feel discriminated against. So instead of asking people on your application form, do you have a disability, you could ask a key question that says, what can we do to make this process accessible for you? And then, I think that then opens the door for a conversation. And I think that's where I would start.
I love that question. That's a great question. So my thinking then is opening the doors so everyone can apply, and particularly disabled people. So not discriminating a quarter of the population. So we can start having those accessibility conversations. But then that leads me to, I guess, the work you're doing, your why, quarter of the population, challenges and perhaps fear in organisations. So what kind of future do you want this to be? What do you want it to have? How can it help disabled people thrive?
I want disabled people to have a level playing field when it comes to applying for jobs. And I think accelerating accessibility can help businesses to achieve that, so that we've got a future whereby disabled people aren't scared to disclose a disability, that disabled people can navigate a recruitment process effectively in a way that meets their needs, and that's also fair. I'd like to see more disabled people having positive experiences in the workplace. So once they're in the business, that they get the equipment, the support that they need quickly, swiftly, efficiently. I would like to see more businesses take proactive action, and not leave disability last on their list. I think it should be moving up the list, and I would absolutely like to see more pressure from government put on businesses to make those adjustments that mean the employment statistics for disabled people improve significantly. And I don't have my disabled radicals coming to me time and time again saying, I've been rejected yet again. Because picking yourself up off the floor 4 or 5 times is hard. But when you're, constantly applying for jobs and you're constantly rejected, it just impacts your self-esteem, your self-confidence. You just want to give up. And it's really tough out there, really tough. And I just hope that a service like Accelerating Accessibility can make the difference that I want it to make, so that disabled people can have the opportunities that they should have and that they deserve, really.
Yeah, agree. And it is tough out there. So the more we can do for everyone, and particularly getting that quarter of the population into work, has got to be a good thing, right? It's got to be a good thing.
It's got to be a good thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, that the 24%, some of those people are in work. But, you've got, as you said earlier, 54% of disabled people in work and 82% of non-disabled people in work. So there's still that huge gap. And, closing that gap has got to be a good thing, surely.
Yeah. So the types of people that you work with and the types of organisations, so do you work with everyone, or do you have a particular section of the community that you work with?
So we've got two businesses, really, Juliet. So we've got Be Radical. So Be Radical helps businesses turn their diversity rhetoric into meaningful action. So we offer consultancy services, we offer training, and we offer recruitment solutions for businesses looking for skilled and experienced hires, as well as the Accelerating Accessibility service. And then we have Radical Recruit, which is the charity supported by Be Radical. And Radical Recruit works with people who are furthest from the labour market. And both organisations work with people who have either a protected characteristic under the law, so disability, people from the LGBTQIA community, or it might be that somebody has a diverse life experience like homelessness, a survivor of domestic violence, contact with the criminal justice system. So we work really with anybody that has a significant barrier to work.
Yeah. And the emphasis on significant, because some of the things you talked about are significant. They have a big impact, don't they, on the individual and what their future looks like. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of the people, especially that we work with in the charity, have, real significant barriers to work. And we work with those people to move those individuals closer to the labour market through tailored employability support. And when we say tailored, we're a really small charity, but we do pride ourselves on tailoring our programs to meet the needs of individuals. And we're really proud that since our conception back in 2019, we've placed, I think, nearly 650 radicals into work.
Wow,
and we've got
amazing.
and we've got a 92% sustainability rate at 6 months because we provide post-placement support.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It gets us out of bed in the morning because, you know what, I spent around 20 years working in the charity sector before moving over to Radical. And I really did feel that the larger charities were moving away from that service delivery model. And the pressure was really on the smaller charities. But I felt like my work wasn't delivering the impact that I wanted to achieve. And I can do that over at Radical Recruit. We make a difference. We change people's lives. And obviously we'd love to do more. But being a teeny tiny team, we're quite restricted in terms of what we can do. But hopefully we will grow, we will scale and be able to help more radical people achieve their career aspirations, including disabled people. So, you know, the ideal scenario for us is that we can help disabled people get job ready. We can, you know, help them create a great CV, build their interview skills. Hopefully then, you know, those individuals either can secure a job independently or, you know, can be placed with one of our radical employers. And then that's when the accelerating accessibility service can then kick in, whereby we can provide that ongoing support to make sure that person really thrives in their job.
I love that. The statistics speak for themselves, Kirsty. So keep doing what you're doing. And the passion comes through when you talk about it. And yeah, it was a really great conversation. Thank you so much. That was brilliant.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Julia. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.